Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today on Zoom for our statewide chapter meeting. I hope everyone's in good health and spirits, and I appreciate your time today. My internet connection is very poor, and I was concerned about it dropping during the Zoom meeting today, so I pre-recorded this presentation, and Don's going to play it from his location. I'll be live on the final PowerPoint, which is much shorter and will be at the end of our meeting. I am Maria Tellier, Assistant State Director for MUFON's New Mexico Chapter and the State Section Director for Doña Ana and Otero counties. I live in Alamogordo, very near to Holloman Air Force Base, where I work. I came to New Mexico from Connecticut, where I had been a MUFON field investigator since 2012. Some of you may know me from New Mexico's MUFON Facebook pages. I hope that you saw the meeting notice there. I really worked hard at trying to get it out there so everyone knew what was going on. I work hard at trying to keep things relevant to New Mexico by posting historical events like today's anniversary of the 1964 Socorro Incident and also current events. I try to post whenever there's a launch from Spaceport or anything that's happening over at White Sands I might get wind of. There's a lot of MUFON organizational updates and notices, TV shows, documentaries that I think might be interesting or relevant, and I try to keep them out there. As you all probably have noticed, I'm on top of that Black Vault posting of the government disclosure documents and the new Freedom of Information Act releases that are out there. There's a lot of action out there right now, and it's exciting times for people like us with interest in this phenomenon. Before we start the rest of the presentation, I want to remind everyone that everything submitted to MUFON is confidential, and we will not divulge your personal information without your written permission to do so. So today I'm going to review the last 20 years of reports submitted by the public to MUFON for investigation. All of these events, as we refer to them, happened in New Mexico. MUFON uses a web-based database that you'll hear me refer to as CMS. This just stands for Case Management System. In 2006, MUFON started using an automated system we call the CMS for logging cases reported on MUFON's website by a witness. It's gone through several transformations and updates along the way. The CMS enables a witness to report something that happened to them recently or in the past, which we call historical events, and even events that are informational only in nature, such as maybe they didn't witness the event themselves at all, or they just are reporting on what they heard or something they saw on the internet. These events could be anything from lights in the sky to possible alien interactions. There were 1,135 New Mexico cases reported over the last 20 years to MUFON. I've summarized them here by county. The number listed is based on the total cases that occurred in that county, not by the witness's address or the location at the time of the report. Bernalillo, having the largest population in the state, also has the largest event count of 321. I searched the CMS for New Mexico cases, and I downloaded them all into Excel spreadsheets and I cleaned them up. There were a lot of spelling errors, and a lot of incorrect county affiliations. We do get reports from out-of-state visitors who come to and saw something while they were into New Mexico. They go back to their home state and then they report it to MUFON. But the fact that the event happened in New Mexico, it now comes over to become a New Mexico case, and we are the ones that will be in charge of the investigation of it. Once I've got all that data in there and cleaned it up, I started sorting it and querying it, and I got the results that I'm going to show to you today during this presentation. I used a slightly different map to try to show our top 10 cities for these reported events over the last 20 years. The number after the city name on the map is how many events happened in that city. I wanted to draw to your attention that Bernalillo County, as we saw in the last slide, had 321 events. Of those 321 events, 258 of them happened in Albuquerque. So let me continue with the presentation by trying to explain the process of reporting cases to MUFON for investigation. Someone sees something that they feel maybe is not a normal occurrence, maybe a light or an object in the sky, not behaving the way you think it should. After you decide you're going to do something, you may decide that you're going to file a MUFON report. You can either Google MUFON or you can just go to our webpage, which is www.mufon.com. Here's the opening page of MUFON's website on the left-hand side. It's not very snazzy. There's two locations on this first page where you can start a sighting report. I've put red arrows to help you find it at the very top because there is extremely small text that says Report UFO. And then midway down the right side of the page, you'll see a little box that says Report your UFO observation, and you're to select that little report box that's there. On the right-hand side of this graphic, on the next page, there's a warning screen. It's regarding the Starlink satellites or the Vandenberg rocket launches, because we've been getting a lot of reported cases that are really just these objects. As an example, in 2020, 20% of all New Mexico reports ended up being identified as Starlink satellites. All light reports, when we receive them, are checked to see if they correspond with Starlink flight patterns in the visible areas of the event. The website Heavens Above is excellent at charting and recording the flight paths of the Starlink and all satellites. In June of 2020, SpaceX actually had to dim the Starlink satellites with a solar shade due to the complaints they were getting of ruining the night sky, which I agree. I am going to present more regarding Starlink in the next presentation at the end of our meeting today, so you can see how drastically it has affected MUFON's reporting. Continuing with the report on page 3, you select what type of event you're reporting, an abduction, a UFO sighting, or an entity seen. This will determine the line of questioning that will come up on the next few pages. Page 4 on the right-hand side there, you'll see it starts just with a selection of questioning that are pertinent to the type of event that you're reporting. You can submit as much or as little as you want, but more is always better. Once the event is submitted, it becomes a case for the state chapter that the event occurred in. It's issued a case number and it's emailed to the state director and assistant state director for MUFON, where the field investigator is then assigned by the state director. Then the investigation process begins. Pending the case classification will determine how quickly the field investigator responds and starts the case. This is just a little graphic we use. It's called the Valet classification system. MUFON has to classify the event, and they grade the case. This chart determines how quickly a field investigator responds to the witness. I always say the higher the category number, the hotter the case. We're required to make 3 attempts to interview a witness before proceeding with the investigation without witness contact. Sometimes the witness reports are very vague and incomplete, and more information is really needed to thoroughly investigate the case. I'll tell you from experience, it's very hard for me to come to a good, solid conclusion without some type of additional witness input and clarification. Everything submitted to MUFON is confidential. We are not going to divulge your name, address, email, or any other personal information regarding your report without your written consent. I think maybe sometimes the witness may be afraid to respond when I reach out for additional information, but you can't make someone respond if they don't want to. So that's the front end of the process. The witness files a report, MUFON classifies and assigns it, and then the field investigator investigates the case. So now we're going to talk about those 1,135 cases in New Mexico reported to MUFON. Shown here are reports displayed by the year they were reported. That's not always the year that they happened. As you can see by the graphic, these case reports drastically started to increase in 2006, but that's the year that the CMS became automated and everything was required to be reported online. New Mexico only had 37 cases reported prior to 2006, and I just didn't think this was right. So I asked MUFON's chief investigator, Doug Wilson, why only 37 cases in 6 years? I mean, what's up with that? He told me that MUFON is still scanning and entering cases prior to 2006 because all of those cases had been either mailed in or telephoned in, that there wasn't an automated system prior to that. Although thinking of that today, it seems a little far-fetched, but that's the way it was done back then. Even the field investigators had to mail in or phone in their results to the cases prior to 2006. So that explains that part of the graphic. Taking a look at the year 2015, there's a drastic increase in cases reported, and that could be for a broad range of reasons. People's internet speeds began to increase and people started doing more things online. MUFON had a television show that ran in 2014 and 2015 called Hangar 1. It brought more attention to MUFON as an organization, and people, went there and reported a lot of historical cases, but then also things that they were seeing at that time. Also, our History Channel has a show, Ancient Aliens, I'm sure we've all watched, and it made discussing UFOs and aliens more mainstream and an acceptable topic of discussion. Ancient Aliens started in 2009 and has increased every year since. And, so I took all that into consideration, but then I also looked at the CMS data in those spreadsheets, and I decided to look at the other southwestern states all around New Mexico to see if there could be some correlation, or maybe the same thing happened in 2015 and it would enlighten the reason why New Mexico had so many cases in 2015. In looking at the 5 southwestern states of New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, Texas, and Utah, I came up with a case count of 1,280 cases. Texas leads the case count with 512 in the year of 2015. I broke the data down a little further by month, and as you can see from this graphic, May, June, and July are the top months. That purple silvery area you see on the graphic is just a highlight to show that the average case count per month is between 10 and 30 cases for all states. I investigated a little further to try to see if there had been a special event or a weather event or a news event or something in the internet that may have sparked an influx of all the reports in the area. And I looked at all these cases, and they weren't reporting the same thing in each state. They were all pretty unique. But the things that were kind of happening that year were in March, the Falcon 9 launched from Vandenberg, California. In May, there was a launch from Cape Canaveral of the Atlas rocket X-37B. At the time, it was described as the Mystery Mission. A lot of people had interest in that, but now we know it was just an Air Force orbital test vehicle, which is still up there and being tracked. In June and October, there was a double planet conjunction that was visible in the western state skies. That was of the planets Venus and Jupiter. And then in September, there was a blood lunar eclipse. None of these events really ended up in any of the MUFON cases for these 5 southwestern states. I went back to New Mexico cases and looked at them again. And I wanted to look a little closer at those 133 cases from 2015. Of those cases, only 94 of the events had actually happened in 2015. The other were from years prior, again, what we categorized as historical events. There were 39 of those type of cases. I also looked at another UFO reporting site, NORFARC, the National UFO Reporting Center, www.nuforc.org. I wanted to see how many cases they had in 2015, and they had 77 of them from New Mexico. NORFARC is not part of MUFON. It's an organization that is dedicated to the collection and dissemination of objective UFO data. They man a 24-hour hotline that's been in service continuously since 1974, and all their reports are available to the public online. Like MUFON, they're a confidential reporting agency, but you can put 2 and 2 together and sometimes figure out that the same event has been reported on both sites. I always check this site when I have a case to see if my witness also reported it to NORFARC and see if they reported the same information, if the story varies from time to time. I found this event that was not reported to MUFON, but was reported on NORFARC and another website that is an excellent example of evidence from an outside source supporting a witness's testimony. And I'm going to just briefly show that case here right in the middle of my presentation to prove my point. An eyewitness called in a report to NORFARC in June of 2015 from Alto, New Mexico. The witness saw an F-16 chasing 4 to 5 objects to the west, and the F-16 could not keep up with it. Could not keep up with them, I'm sorry. He then saw additional jets chasing 15 to 30 objects west to south. This activity was viewed from his front porch for 30 to 40 minutes until the jets and the objects disappeared to the north and he could not see them anymore. The objects were described as brightly lighted objects. This report is available on both NORFARC's and another agency's site, which is called UFOs Northwest. UFOs Northwest investigated the case further by filing a Freedom of Information Act requesting flight data from Holloman. Significant data was presented from that report and gathered from the FAA. They both provided the data that you see in these graphics. On the left is the flight report from Holloman, and we can see here that there was F-16 activity in the witness's area at the time of the sighting, 11:40 p.m. The graphic on the right shows the flight pattern of the F-16 backed up by the FAA data. The F-16s out of Holloman normally don't have transponders engaged on them. I track a lot of air traffic out of there because I live right next to it. I use a free program called Flight Radar 24, but it only picks up data if there's a transponder on the aircraft. I've noticed that usually there's just one of the vehicles when they're testing, and usually there's 4 or 5 of them in a group. Only the lead guy will have on the transponder when the F-16s are coming out of Holloman. UFOs Northwest allowed me to use their excellent graphics and representations for this to show these to you guys today. The one on the left is showing a gray area, which is called White Sands Missile Range. It's a restricted area. Only authorized aircraft can fly in that area, like F-16s. The witness's location in Alto, you'll see my big gold star there, is about 20 miles to the east of the restricted area. On the right side graphic, that's FAA data that was taken, that they are radar hits that were taken from a long-range AR-SR-4 radar sensor, which is in Eagle Peak, Texas. That sensor has a range of 250 miles, and they're south of Alto. Alto is about 150 miles away from that sensor. Roswell also has what's called a short-range radar sensor. They're about 60 miles away from Alto to the west. That data was also used to evaluate the returns. A radar signal is an indication of an object which has reflected energy. So they just confirmed there was something there, not that it was a plane, and it doesn't matter if it did or didn't have a transponder. Using this evidence, you can see how it backs up the witness's account of seeing multiple objects in the sky, and the behavior of the objects matches the timeline. I tell you, I really wish this guy had reported this to MUFON. In this 20-year summary, when I was pouring through all this data, I found more than 55 reports of lights in the sky in this surrounding area that we're looking at right now. I'm going to present another PowerPoint later today, which again is light activity in this general area. And I'm telling you, there is a lot of action around Sierra Blanca, Three Rivers, and the Mescalero Reservation throughout New Mexico's history. So back to my little less dramatic graphics, little less dramatic than the last two slides. This graphic is showing events by the year that they occurred, from 1938 to 2020. Like I said previously, in the CMS, you can report an event, regardless of the date or when you saw it or when you heard from it. Over the last 20 years, many people reported historical events that they remember from years prior, or someone had told them about it, or they remember their grandmom or somebody told them a story. And you can report that on our CMS. But these cases are the hardest to investigate. And usually all you can do is web searches for old newspaper reports or police accounts, and they're few and far in between. Also, these type of cases, it's hardest to get the witness to respond back to you when you ask them about it. It seems, I don't know why, they report the cases and they just do not want to follow up with you. I end a lot of these cases myself as information only and insufficient data because I just can't go any further with them. I put a red line here on the graph to show reported events that were reported as they occurred versus something that happened in a witness's past. You can see after MUFON made reporting automated, these cases jumped dramatically. On this graphic, I'm showing some of the more famous New Mexico cases and events from our famous historical history. In July of 1945, the Trinity atomic bomb blast is the little black arrow. July 1947, the Roswell incident is the light green, followed the next year in March of 1948, the Aztec crash. And in 1964, the Socorro, and a few days later, the Holloman incident are the aqua-colored arrow there in the middle. April 24th, today, is the anniversary of the Socorro incident. Don has reported to us on many occasions about this and the Holloman event. The Socorro incident was what they call the straw that broke the camel's back, so to say. Dr. Allen Hynek was a skeptic and was turned to a believer after investigating this case for the Air Force. He was their lead investigator for Project Blue Book. There was recently a television show, Project Blue Book, which I know a lot of us watched, and Dr. Hynek was represented there. So as we move closer to government disclosure, I am anxiously awaiting more information about these two events. And also you can see here, March of 1980, the shuttle Columbia landed at White Sands. It's the darker blue arrow. So here in the last part of our presentation, we're going to talk about how cases are closed. Speculation or guessing is not acceptable for coming to a final disposition for a MUFON case. MUFON expects all field investigators to apply the scientific method to our investigative process. We establish a hypothesis, and then we set out to prove or disprove the hypothesis, coming to a final disposition. MUFON gives us these choices for our final dispositions when reporting our cases and closing them. Within 90 days from being assigned, we're expected to close our case. In the MUFON organization, the majority of all cases reported have a final disposition of IFO. Either it's an identifiable object, a natural phenomenon, or a man-made object. So a little more about the criteria for choosing a disposition. Unknowns are just that, they're unknown. We do our work, we try to prove our theories, we follow our evidence, but at the end we just can't get to the bottom of it. And if we're 90% certain, we just close it as an unknown. Far too many cases are closed as unknowns. IFOs, don't we certainly have an abundance of these here in this state. IFO, man-made objects. To the west, we have the Border Patrol blimps that are frequently reported. Now they're calling them Tic Tacs. Wismar White Sands Missile Range is the largest installation in the United States, 3,200 square miles, and nearby Holloman Air Force Base, which is home to the 704th Test Group, is the Air Force's program testing facility. We lovingly call them secret squirrels around here. To the south, there is an Army test range called McGregor Range. It borders Texas all the way to Fort Bliss in El Paso. In the central part of our state, in the Albuquerque area, we have Kirtland Air Force Base. And then to the east, we have Cannon Air Force Base, which is the home of the Air Force's Special Ops. So we have a lot of identifiable objects in our airspace. Insufficient data is just that. I use it when I can't get a response from a witness, when I can't find historical information, and I just can't back up the claim that's been made by the witness. But it's very different from hoax event or hoax keystroke. I use this immediately if I feel that a witness has fabricated or enhanced their photographs or their evidence. If I find conflicting information on a witness's Facebook page or blog site, I will call it a hoax and stop wasting my time. I really hate to use this disposition because when somebody tells me so, I believe when someone thinks they saw something and that they take the time to report it. It really burns me up when it ends up being fake or what I feel is fabricated. So how did most of New Mexico's cases end in the last 20 years? The majority of them, 46%, were completed as unknown. In either an unknown aerial vehicle or an unknown other. Unknown other is like an orb or a strange moving light that has no structure or a floating object. Unknown and insufficient data account for 637 out of the 1,135 cases reported. That's more than 50% of all of our state cases over the last 20 years. So why do we have a majority of cases that end up being unable to identify? Lack of information from the witness makes investigation limited, but not impossible. But I have to wonder if many of our unknown dispositions will change when we get to the government disclosure of previously unidentifiable aerial phenomenon. As I have said on previous slides, there's been a tremendous amount of documentation released. You can read it for yourself on the website, The Black Vault. More than 2 million formally classified documents were recently released. And it seems like daily we're getting releases of footage of unidentifiable objects from the military. So to me, it seems like something's about to happen, something that we've all been waiting for. So let me get back on topic. I hope I was able to summarize the last 20 years of New Mexico MUFON cases in an interesting and informative manner. The investigation for the last 20 years left me with two questions about New Mexico. Why do we end so many cases as unidentifiable, and why don't witnesses respond to cases that they just reported? I'd love to know what everyone's opinion is on this. I really would. And if I gather enough feedback back on it, I will make another PowerPoint about it. And if you like, you can email me. I have my email address up there, ctmufon316@gmail.com, or you can visit our Facebook pages. The New Mexico Facebook group page is where I put the New Mexico related events and information and topics of interest. I love when someone puts their opinion out there, anything, all of our common interests, flying saucers or alien visitation. Please stay on point. At the last count, I have 408 members on our MUFON group page. I appreciate and respect everyone's opinion, participation, and input. We also have another page. It's just called the Mexican MUFON, the New Mexico MUFON page, and it is used for just general event information, and we need to have it in order to have the group page. It's a Facebook rule. So locally here in Alamogordo, I used to have a informal get-together at Patrons Hall on New York Avenue, until COVID hit, of course. It was called Coffee Cups and Flying Saucers. I would like to start it back up again once we get the coast is clear to go back out and enjoy ourselves. And really all we did is we drank coffee and we just talked to one another about our like topic that we all are interested in. I remember when I was back in Connecticut, one of the members used to go to senior centers, and he'd give a little presentation about MUFON and what MUFON is, and then they would just sit around and they would talk. And he would come back with stories and information that none of us had ever heard of before. There's a rich history in Alamogordo and in all of New Mexico regarding aerial phenomenon, as they like to refer to it now. There's a lot of unknown objects in our skies, and we love to talk about it with each other. So again, I want to thank you for your time today. We appreciate your interest in aerial phenomenon, known and unknown, and thank you all for your interest in MUFON.